Now to something weird in New South Wales. It's this announcement by the state government that the maximum that any school student can be suspended will be cut from 20 days to 10. And they can only be sent home for physical violence that is serious. Well, it's already getting so hard for principals to control children. I mean, for a start, so many children now from broken homes, 1 million now. Can you believe that? And for some I know, other children, beautiful. But for some, that is associated with less discipline. And then there's the general disrespect you see for authority now. You particularly see it in the rise in street crime, for instance, over the past few decades, particularly juvenile street crime. And there is also another factor. It's something that people don't like to talk about. But it's there today in a story from the other side of the country, from Broome in Western Australia, about incredible violence there by a gang of female bullies at a school. Victims have suffered broken bones even, bruising, ongoing trauma from these incidents, with some forced to quit their part-time jobs and stay home from school out of sheer fear. Now that's an ABC story, and it's a bit of self-censoring going on this issue, because, well, you'll see, most readers would have been left wondering, how could there be that kind of violence and going on for months? Who are these violent kids, and why isn't something done? But if you go deep, deep, deep down in this ABC story and you read this little code, this clue from a senior sergeant in Broome, he said youth policing officers and Aboriginal community liaison officers were working closely with the girls and their guardians, not their parents, the guardians. And now you get it. Now you get it. Now you see perhaps why parents are saying, why isn't the school taking much tougher disciplinary action to protect their girls? Knowing that, let's go back to the New South Wales plan. Why is it now cutting discipline in schools? Well, it seems it's again that diversity ideology that has made the Victorian government so absolutely hopeless in tackling the coronavirus. Diversity. As the Sydney Morning Herald puts it, last year, 13% of Aboriginal students received a short suspension, compared to with just 4.2% of all students. I was joined a short while ago, as I am every Thursday, by Mark Latham, former federal Labor leader and now One Nation leader in the New South Wales Parliament. I spoke to him a short while. Mark Latham, thank you so much for joining me. Is cutting back on suspension the right way to deal with problem students?
Well, Andrew, for a lot of the victims of bullying and thuggery in the schools, a 20-day suspension gives the students and the parents some peace of mind that for at least 4 school weeks, that student is free of the thug, the bully, who's been terrorising them in the school, beating them black and blue. Now, that's a reality out there. It's not very pleasant to say it, but a respite when the bully is out of the school on suspension is actually a good thing for the victim. So reducing the period of suspension from 20 to 10 days makes it more likely that these victims of violence in schools will cop it again and again. So it's no solution at all. And what's really disturbing about this is that it's being done on the basis of skin colour. I've come from a parliamentary debate in the New South Wales Upper House earlier today, where the Education Minister, Sarah Mitchell, has said that the kids suspended are among the most vulnerable in our society, meaning they're Indigenous. Well, what about the victims that have been left behind in the schools? Aren't they the true vulnerable students that we're worried about? And to essentially, because of Aboriginality, give some kids a free pass to say they're not as deserving to be suspended, somehow that's the solution, is so woolly-headed, woke, wrong, misdirected and way out of touch with reality. The solution, of course, is zero tolerance of bullying and violence in our schools, and for kids who do it, some real wellbeing programs, male mentoring, assistance, behavioural change, working with the families to get these kids back on the right track instead of using their skin colour as an excuse for appalling behaviour.
Well, fundamentally, it strikes me as a change that's driven by racism, the bigotry of low expectations to Aboriginal children, just treating them like, well, you know, they can't possibly be bound by the laws, the regulations that apply to all other people. I mean, I just think this is crazy. But for me, Mark, this is an exact parallel or a metaphor for the problem with the Morrison government's new targets for Aboriginal welfare that it released a few weeks ago, a problem pointed out by people like Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine. The federal government, the Morrison government, a Liberal government again, has a target to cut the number of Aborigines in jail, but not a target to cut the number of Aborigines committing crime. Again, racist, and it doesn't help Aborigines.
No, it doesn't, because very often the Indigenous person who's committed a dreadful crime, to put them in jail protects their victims who are also Indigenous. All the data shows that the greatest victims of Indigenous crime are other Indigenous. So you just can't run these things this way on the basis of skin colour. The true merit and fairness is to look at every individual circumstance and say victims' rights come first. Protecting people is a very, very good thing, and one of the essential protections is to take bad people out of our society and put them in prison. So vulnerable Indigenous women and children suffer because of this thinking. And just to come back to the New South Wales schools example, what's happened here is that Mark Scott, unfortunately the head of the New South Wales Education Department, formerly he was head of the ABC, he has sat down with the Minister and said, "Oh, Minister, the basic problem here is that Indigenous in New South Wales are 3% of the students, but 13% of those suspended. So we better cut the suspensions and go softer." Now, that is just so appalling. As you say, you know, a form of bigotry in its own right, but no solution for the victims of bullying in a school or crime in society, and no solution for the perpetrators. So this sort of stuff is woke, ineffective and pathetic.
And it also shows that the New South Wales Liberal Party, which also controls, by the way, the Morrison government, have succumbed to identity politics themselves. They have given in, they've surrendered, they've become the racists I thought they were opposed to in the first place. Now, Mark, I said at the top of the show that the Greens now want us to get rid of gas-fired electricity. They want us already to get rid of coal. They don't want more dams. That's hydropower. They hate nuclear as well, which essentially leaves the country with next to no electricity at all. But although we do know that the Greens are totally irrational and destructive, what about the New South Wales Liberal government again? I mean, what is it with the Liberals? You had a bill to drop the totally irrational 33-year-old ban in that state, and other states have got bans like this too, on uranium and nuclear power. You thought you had their support. What happened?
Well, essentially, it wasn't just my bill. The Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, to his credit, has been advocating for this for 3 years. So what it's highlighted is an appalling policy-making culture inside the Berejiklian government, where the Deputy Premier can advocate for something for 3 years. I come into the Parliament and say, well, more than advocacy, let's legislate it, let's do it. I put up the bill. At various times, I was told they'd support the nuclear component, not the uranium, then vice versa, and in the end, they did nothing. Now, I think it's extraordinary that for a safe, effective industry just across the western border in South Australia, the New South Wales government would say that the western districts of our state that have been ravaged by drought, COVID and now recession would have a banned industry. We know the uranium's in the ground around Broken Hill, possibly Dubbo. Why not take the ban off, liberate the industry, generate some jobs and investment and do something to help people in a deep and nasty recession? So when a Liberal government is against that, and some of the reasons you just wouldn't believe, you know, MPs down the South Coast saying they're worried about their seat. Truly? I mean, it is a very bad sign in terms of the quality of policy-making culture inside the Liberal Party, and a very bad sign, Andrew, these people haven't got the direction, the purpose and the political wit about them to back in sensible solutions to create jobs and get Australia out of a recession that, quite frankly, if these people run it, we'll be in this for a decade.
Weak and woolly. Mark Latham, thank you so much at least for fighting for a little bit of rationality there, and see you next week.
We live in hope.